10 Beyond. Diem Binkain Duliogal Malo Gajang Jayajolhan Geosun? 3 Jam. There was nothing modern about the idea of men making women's clothes. We saw them doing it for centuries in the past. In the old days, however, the client was always primary. And her tailor was an obscure craftsman, perhaps talented but perhaps not. She had her own ideas like any patron, there were no fashion plates. And the tailor was simply at her service, perhaps with helpful suggestions about what others were wearing. Beginning in the late 19th century, with the hugely successful rise of the artistic male couturier, it was the designer who became celebrated, and the client elevated by his inspired attention. In a climate of admiration for male artists and their female creations, the dress designer first flourished as the same sort of creator. Instead of the old rule that dressmaking is a craft, a modern connection between dress design and art was invented that had not been there before. 11 Beyond. Diem Binkain Duliogal Malo Gajang Jayajolhan Geosun? Some of the most insightful work on information seeking emphasizes strategic self-ignorance, understood as the use of ignorance as an excuse to engage excessively in pleasurable activities that may be harmful to one's future self. The idea here is that if people are present biased, they might avoid information that would make current activities less attractive, perhaps because it would produce guilt or shame, perhaps because it would suggest an aggregate trade-off that would counsel against engaging in such activities. Street. Augustine famously said, "God give me chastity tomorrow." Present biased agents think, "Please let me know the risks tomorrow." Whenever people are thinking about engaging in an activity with short-term benefits, but long-term costs, they might prefer to delay receipt of important information. The same point might hold about information that could make people sad or mad. Please tell me what I need to know tomorrow. 12 Beyond. Diem Binkain Duliogal Malo Gajang Jayajolhan Geosun? News, especially in its televised form, is constituted not only by its choice of topics and stories, but by its verbal and visual idioms or modes of address. Presentational styles have been subject to a tension between an informational educational purpose and the need to engage us entertainingly. While current affairs programs are often serious in tone, sticking to the rules of balance, more popular programs adopt a friendly, lighter idiom, in which we are invited to consider the impact of particular news items from the perspective of the average person in the street. Indeed, contemporary news construction has come to rely on an increased use of faster editing tempos and flashier presentational styles, including the use of logos, sound bites, rapid visual cuts, and the star quality of newsreaders. Popular formats can be said to enhance understanding by engaging an audience unwilling to endure the longer verbal orientation of older news formats. However, they arguably work to reduce understanding by failing to provide the structural contexts for news events. 13 Beyond. Diem Binkain Duliogal Malo Gajang Jayajolhan Geosun? 3 Jam. If the nature of a thing is such that when removed from the environment in which it naturally occurs it alters radically, you will not glean an accurate account of it by examining it within laboratory conditions. If you are only accustomed to seeing it operate within such an artificial arena, you may not even recognize it when it is functioning in its normal context. Indeed, if you ever spot it in that environment, you may think it is something else. Similarly, if you believe that leadership only takes the form of heroic men metaphorically charging in on white horses to save the day, you may neglect the many acts which contribute to their ability to be there. You may fail to see the importance of the grooms who care for the horses, the messengers who bring attention to the crisis, or the role played by those cheering from the sidelines. You may miss the fact that without troops supporting them, any claims to leading on the part of these heroes would be rather hollow. 14 Beyond. Diem Binkain Duliogal Malo Gajang Jayajolhan Geosun? 3 Jam. Eleanor Ostrom found that there are several factors critical to bringing about stable institutional solutions to the problem of the commons. She pointed out, for instance, that the actors affected by the rules for the use and care of resources must have the right to participate in decisions to change the rules. For that reason, the people who monitor and control the behavior of users should also be users, and/or have been given a mandate by all users. This is a significant insight, as it shows that prospects are poor for a centrally directed solution to the problem of the commons, coming from a state power in comparison with a local solution for which users assume personal responsibility. Ostrom also emphasizes the importance of democratic decision processes, and that all users must be given access to local forums for solving problems and conflicts among themselves. Political institutions at central, regional, and local levels must allow users to devise their own regulations and independently ensure observance. 15 Beyond. Diem Binkain Duliogal Malo Gajang Jayajolhan Geosun, 3 Jam. In the less developed world, the percentage of the population involved in agriculture is declining. But at the same time, those remaining in agriculture are not benefiting from technological advances. The typical scenario in the less developed world is one in which a very few commercial agriculturalists are technologically advanced, while the vast majority are incapable of competing. Indeed, this vast majority have lost control over their own production because of larger global causes. As an example, in Kenya, farmers are actively encouraged to grow export crops, such as tea and coffee, at the expense of basic food production. The result is that a staple crop, such as maize, is not being produced in a sufficient amount. The essential argument here is that the capitalist mode of production is affecting peasant production in the less developed world, in such a way as to limit the production of staple foods, thus causing a food problem. 16 Beyond. Diem Binkain Duliogal Malo Gajang Jayajolhan Geosun. With population growth slowing, the strongest force increasing demand for more agricultural production will be rising incomes, which are desired by practically all governments and individuals. Although richer people spend smaller proportions of their income on food, in total, they consume more food and richer food, which contributes to various kinds of disease and debilitation. The changes in diet that usually accompany higher incomes will require relatively greater increases in the production of feed grains, rather than food grains, as foods of animal origin partly displace plant-based foods in people's diets. It takes 2 to 6 times more grain to produce food value through animals than to get the equivalent value directly from plants. It is thus quite credible to estimate that, in order to meet economic and social needs within the next 3 to 5 decades, the world should be producing more than twice as much grain and agricultural products as at present, but in ways that these are accessible to the food insecure. 17 Beyond. Diem Binkain Duliogal Malo Gajang Jayajolhan Geosun, 3 Jam. A large part of what we see is what we expect to see. This explains why we see faces and figures in a flickering campfire, or in moving clouds. This is why Leonardo da Vinci advised artists to discover their motifs by staring at patches on a blank wall. A fire provides a constant, flickering change in visual information that never integrates into anything solid, and thereby allows the brain to engage in a play of hypotheses. On the other hand, the wall does not present us with very much in the way of visual clues, and so the brain begins to make more and more hypotheses, and desperately searches for confirmation. A crack in the wall looks a little like the profile of a nose, and suddenly a whole face appears, or a leaping horse, or a dancing figure. In cases like these, the brain's visual strategies are projecting images from within the mind out onto the world. 18 Beyond. Diem Binkain Duliogal Malo Gajang Jayajolhan Geosun, 3 Jam. Sometimes it seems that contemporary art isn't doing its job unless it provokes the question. But is it art? I'm not sure the question is worth asking. It seems to me that the line between art and not art is never going to be a sharp one. Worse, as the various art forms poetry, drama, sculpture, painting, fiction, dance, etc. are so different, I'm not sure why we should expect to be able to come up with a single definition that can capture their variety. Art seems to be a paradigmatic example of a Wittgensteinian family resemblance concept. Try to specify the necessary and sufficient condition for something qualifying as art, and you'll always find an exception to your criteria. If philosophy were to admit defeat in its search for some immutable essence of art, it is hardly through lack of trying. Arguably, we have very good reasons for thinking that this has been one of the biggest wild goose chases in the history of ideas.